Chapter 17. War of Independence and Early Years. History of Israel, the night of May 14, 1948 in Tel Aviv, smelled of sweat, dust, and cigarettes. In a small hall on Rothschild Boulevard, the atmosphere was charged with history. Men in worn suits and women with tired eyes, many of them survivors of Europe. Infernos pressed together as David Ben-Gurion, his hair a shock of white, stood at the podium. The declaration in his hand trembled, not only from age, but from the gravity of the moment. He read the words slowly, each syllable heavy. We hereby declare the establishment of a Jewish state in Eretz Israel, to be known as the State of Israel. Outside, car horns erupted, people danced in the streets, and tears ran down the faces of those who had survived exile and slaughter. They kissed the ground, held each other, and whispered blessings. But underneath the jubilation was a deeper fear. For the young state was born under siege. Even as Tel Aviv's cafes rang with music and clinking glasses, Arab armies were massing on every border. A day after independence, the skies would darken with planes and the fields echo with gunfire. The new nation had drawn its first breath amid jubilation and terror. The world had witnessed the impossible. A people who had nearly been annihilated in Europe had returned to sovereignty in their ancient homeland. Yet the ink on the declaration was barely dry when war thundered in. The 1948 Arab-Israeli War. The war began before it was officially declared. In truth, civil strife had already engulfed the land since the UN partition plan of November 1947, which proposed dividing Palestine into two states, one Jewish, one Arab. The Jewish Agency had accepted it reluctantly, seeing it as a step towards statehood. But Arab leaders rejected it outright, viewing it as a theft of land. From December 1947 to May 1948, what historians call the Civil War phase raged across Palestine. Arab irregulars and local militias attacked Jewish convoys, settlements, and neighborhoods. Roads were ambushed, food shipments cut off. The lifeline to Jerusalem, a twisting road through hostile hills, was besieged, leaving the Jewish quarter starving. The Jewish community, known as the Yishuv, responded with hastily organized defense forces. The Haganah, an underground militia that had long prepared for such a moment, transformed into a proto-army. Young men and women, many fresh from DP camps in Europe, found rifles thrust into their hands. Others joined the more radical groups, the Irgun and Lahihu's tactics of bombings and reprisals, left deep scars and controversies that echo still. Then came May 15, 1948. At midnight, as the British lowered their flag and sailed away, 5 Arab armies invaded: Egypt from the south, Jordan's Arab Legion from the east, Syria and Lebanon from the north, and Iraq through the Jordan Valley. They outnumbered the fledgling Israeli forces nearly 3-1, with tanks, artillery, and air power that Israel did not yet possess. The battles were savage, desperate, and intimate. In the Negev desert, Israeli fighters held out against Egyptian armor with little more than Molotov cocktails and old Czech rifles. In Jerusalem, young Palmach fighters tunneled through ancient alleys and carried food on their backs to feed the besieged Jewish quarter. In the north, kibbutz farmers fought from their fields, transforming plows into barricades. International volunteers arrived to mackle fighters, Jews and non-Jews alike. Veterans of World War II who could fly planes or man artillery. Clandestine operations brought in weapons from Czechoslovakia, a lifeline that tilted the balance at crucial moments. The cost was immense. By the time the armistices were signed in 1949, Israel had lost nearly 1% of its population, 6,000. Dead out of 650,000 Jews. Every family carried grief. But Israel had not only survived, it had expanded beyond the UN partition borders, seizing territories in Galilee, the Negev, and much of central Palestine. For the Palestinians, however, the war was remembered as Nakba's the catastrophe. Some 700,000 Arab inhabitants fled or were expelled from their homes, creating a refugee crisis that would fester for decades, shaping the conflict to come. In the smoky ruins of Lida, Ramel, and Jaffa, history left wounds that still bleed. Mass immigration and nation building, even as the guns fell silent, another flood began this time of people. Israel was not simply a state for its residents. It declared itself a homeland for Jews everywhere, and they came in ships and planes, often with nothing but a suitcase or the clothes on their backs. From the displaced persons camps of Germany and Austria, survivors of Auschwitz and Bergen-Belsen staggered off ships, eyes hollow yet burning with determination. From Yemen and Iraq, Jews poured in through clandestine airlifts operation Magic Carpet 1949-50, whisked nearly 50,000 Yemenite Jews into Israel. Their centuries-old communities vanishing overnight. In 1951, Operation Ezra and Nehemiah brought more than 120,000 Iraqi Jews, many of them stripped of property and citizenship. By the early 1950s, Israel's population had doubled. This was both a miracle and a crisis. Tent camps, known as Mubarat, sprawled across the land. Families lived in corrugated shacks, mud huts, or canvas tents that leaked in the winter rains and baked in the summer sun. Malnutrition was rampant, unemployment high. Ben-Gurion's government faced an impossible task: absorb masses of immigrants while building institutions, an economy, and an army all in the shadow of hostile neighbors. Yet there was also a heady sense of mission. The revival of Hebrew as a living language bound together immigrants from Morocco, Poland, Iran, and Russia. Kibbutzim absorbed orphans and refugees, teaching them to farm and to fight. Schools mushroomed, hospitals were built, and universities expanded. But tensions lurked. Ashkenazi Jews from Europe often looked down on Mizrahi Jews from Middle Eastern and North African countries, dismissing their traditions as backward. Many Sephardi families were relegated to development towns in the desert or periphery, far from Tel Aviv's cultural heart. The scars of this divide would echo through Israeli politics for generations. Challenges in economy, security, and diplomacy, the early 1950s, were years of grinding austerity. Israel had no oil, few natural resources, and a devastated agricultural base. Food was rationed. Bread, sugar, and eggs were scarce. Families received coupons, and children stood in long queues for milk. Imported goods were luxuries. The economy relied on international loans, contributions from diaspora Jews, and eventually, controversial reparations from West Germany. Security remained fragile. Though the 1949 armistices had ended open warfare, Israel's borders were tense and porous. Palestinian refugees, now in camps across Gaza, the West Bank, Lebanon, and Jordan, often crossed back to tend their fields or reclaim possessions. Israel labeled them infiltrators and responded with harsh reprisals. Arab states refused to recognize Israel and spoke openly of future war. Diplomatically, Israel walked a tightrope. It sought legitimacy among Western powers, aligning closely with the United States, while also relying on France for arms. The Soviet Union, initially supportive due to its own anti-colonial stance, soon cooled as the Cold War hardened and Israel tilted westward. In the United Nations, Israel often found itself isolated, facing resolutions critical of its policies. At home, politics were dominated by Ben-Gurion and his Mapai party. His vision was one of self-reliance, pioneering labor, and military readiness. He believed the army, now the Israel Defense Forces IDF, should be the crucible of national identity, uniting immigrants and creating a disciplined citizenry. He demanded sacrifice, sometimes ruthlessly, pushing the nation to prioritize defense and settlement over comfort. Yet amid hardship, there was resilience. The arts flourished, theaters opened, poets wrote in modern Hebrew, and musicians blended European and Middle Eastern traditions. Sports leagues formed, radio crackled with news in Hebrew, and for the first time in 2,000 years, Jewish farmers worked their land not as tenants but as sovereign citizens. The War of 1948 and the early years that followed were formative crucibles for Israel. The war had secured independence, but at enormous cost, entrenching the dual narratives of triumph and catastrophe that remain locked in tension between Israelis and Palestinians. Mass immigration transformed Israel from a small enclave into a diverse, crowded, and often fractious society. Without the influx of Jews from Arab lands, Israel would not have survived demographically. Yet the struggles of absorption housing, employment, cultural prejudice planted seeds of social divides that still shape Israeli politics. Economically, the years of rationing forced innovation and discipline, setting the stage for later growth. Diplomatically, Israel's early isolation honed a culture of self-reliance and suspicion of international institutions, attitudes that echo into the 21st century. Above all, the story of these years is one of paradox. A people traumatized by persecution building a state of extraordinary resilience. While in other people, the Palestinians experienced dispossession and exile, the symmetry of joy and despair, of homecoming and catastrophe, lies at the heart of the conflict that continues to shape the region. On a humid evening in Tel Aviv in 1952, a group of immigrant children played soccer in the dust of a Mubarak camp. Their ball was patched with tape. Their laughter rang across the tents. Nearby, their parents stood in line for rationed bread, weary but unbroken. Behind them, cranes rose over new apartment blocks, and the Hebrew language filled the air like an incantation. The state of Israel had been born in fire and hunger, in triumph and mourning. Its survival was uncertain, its challenges immense. Yet in the faces of those children, barefoot in the dust, yet speaking a language resurrected from ancient scripture, one could glimpse the stubborn miracle of nationhood. The story of Israel's early years is not one of peace or prosperity, but of survival, resilience, and the audacity to dream. It was a beginning written in sweat and sacrifice, a prologue to struggles yet to come.